See behind me, actually, I've got my Babar Azam shirt and my England shirt from the test in Rawalpindi, which was probably one of the greatest test matches of all time. And of course, the High Commissioner had to be there for all 5 days. It was a requirement of my job. It would be dangerous for me to tell my successor what to do, although you have an excellent diplomat in new High Commissioner Jane Marriott, a good friend of mine. The economic crisis threatening Pakistan, is well commented on. Lekin maine urdu bahut kharab hai, kyunki khana bahut mazedar hai. And I will try and make sure I have some dal for lunch today, just to show you I'm still keeping my hand in.
Hello and welcome to Info Talks, a podcast where I put you in the room with some of the biggest thought leaders from around the world. We bring you another episode of our special edition. Today, our featured guest is someone you have known for his service as Britain's High Commissioner in Kenya and later in Pakistan, and had won a large fan following in Pakistan for speaking directly to the people of his host country. He's currently serving as the political director of the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office. Our special guest is High Commissioner Christian Turner. And with him, I have Pakistan's former National Security Advisor and Vice Chancellor, Beacon House National University, Dr. Moeed Yusuf. Gentlemen, welcome to Info Talks.
Thank you. It's very good to be with you.
High Commissioner Turner, let me start our conversation with both of you. You both have had an opportunity to work together on a variety of issues. High Commissioner, you served as Britain's High Commissioner in Pakistan. Dr. Moeed, you served as Pakistan's National Security Advisor back then. Let me then ask you, how did you both really get along?
Well, am I allowed to go first on this, Dr. Moeed?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I want to have the last word, Christian.
Always allow Moeed Yusuf the last word. We got on very well, as you can tell, and in one of the great pleasures of diplomacy is the ability to build friendships and get to know people, and I would very much, Moeed, count you as a great friend from my time in Pakistan. I think what's underlying the question, though, is actually it's about what diplomacy is. And for me, when people say to me, well, what do you actually do all day? What is diplomacy? My answer is it's about trust and relationships and the ability to build a relationship with a counterpart who actually both, Moeed, in your role as National Security Advisor and the work you did afterwards, allows that trust, allows you to get under the issues, to listen to one another. And when one is disagreeing, and there are disagreements between most countries, to do so agreeably. That, I think, is at the core of, I hope, how we work together. But you must tell me if that's different.
No, I think I agree. Look, Osama, I think I don't have to say this. Everybody in Pakistan at the time knew Christian was definitely the most proactive High Commissioner / ambassador. I mean, talking to the people is one thing, but even behind closed doors, he broke the barriers of traditional diplomacy, I thought. And for somebody like me who wasn't a bureaucrat, who was coming from the private sector, I think it was a good click. I really enjoyed it because we could openly talk. And I'll tell you, if Christian allows, we had many serious disagreements on a number of things, specific things, some general things, and some areas where we talked every time we disagreed, and we went on to still find a solution for our countries. I'm proud to say there are a number of specific developments that I won't mention here that we were able to achieve, not only me, but our entire system in Pakistan and Christian on the other side. So I really enjoyed it. It was one of those where you could really detox and open up and have a very open conversation and know that it's not going to go out of the room, and still both countries will benefit from that disagreement. And many a times we agreed and we pushed those things through.
So, High Commissioner Turner, let me then ask you a very important question about, the bilateral relationship. You served as the Britain's High Commissioner. Then let me ask you, what do you think are some of the pluses and the minuses of the relationship? And during your stint, what do you think were some aspects that you think you could have done differently, or perhaps now that we have your successor in place, could really, build on some of the existing facets of the relationship?
It would be dangerous for me to tell my successor what to do, although you have an excellent diplomat in the new High Commissioner, Jane Marriott, a good friend of mine. Look, for us, the UK-Pakistan relationship, everyone knows, because I talked about it a lot in my tenure, one of the most important relationships for the UK, one of our largest embassies in the world, the High Commission in Islamabad, and our offices in Lahore and Karachi. And that was built about one core thing, which I always came back to, and that was the people-to-people links between the two countries. You remember I talked about UK Pak Dosti, Hum Ek Saath Hain, that real sense of connectivity that comes when you've got 100,000 Brits in Pakistan, 1.6 million British Pakistani diaspora in the UK. And for all of the government-to-government work that Moeed was just describing, in the end, it's those people-to-people links that locked us together. Inevitably, my tenure was shaped in some senses by things that I couldn't have anticipated when I started. We had the coronavirus pandemic, the difficult work through that, including the impact on the travel links between the two countries. We had the floods in 2019, the takeover of the Taliban in Kabul. All of those were events I had to respond to. But as we faced some of those headwinds, it was those people-to-people links we came back to. I think looking forward, the two areas that I would say should become more and more important in our relationship and the discussions we have as two countries are first, shared economic growth and trade. In the end, the economic crisis threatening Pakistan, is well commented on how a country like Britain can put its assets, its trade, its businesses behind helping create the conditions for growth, helping create jobs. Very, very important. So that would be the first. And the second would be climate change. The whole world is facing this climate emergency. In the floods last year, Pakistan really showed that it was on the front line of that with an enormous human and economic impact. And all of the data, all of the science is telling us that those impacts are not going to go away, and being able to collaborate and partner to address that together, I think, will become increasingly important for the two countries.
Hi, Commissioner Turner. Then let me draw your attention and also Dr. Moeed's attention to, an important question. We've seen Pakistan on one hand fare really better on, a lot of issues, like, for example, when we speak of the issue of terrorism, when we speak of the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic, or, bringing under control the locust infestation. But on the other hand, we've seen Pakistan, struggle on issues like, bringing about economic stability or the economic governance and the issue of, political stability. What do you think, in your opinion, is perhaps the case? Is it about getting the basics right, or is there more to bringing about a conducive environment? A question to both of you, starting from High Commissioner Turner.
It's a good question. I mean, it's very, as a diplomat, even as I've left the job, I'm very careful about trying to come in and suggest I've got perfect solutions to the very complex challenges any country faces. I mean, we face in the UK, Pakistan faces. And I do think that list of achievements, I often said, I think there were negative perceptions of Pakistan, which sometimes unfairly didn't give the credit for its response in, say, the coronavirus pandemic, the response to the terrorist threat from the middle of the last decade. So I think you're right to say that story needs telling. I think most people looking at a low middle income country like Pakistan would say it is about putting systems in place. It's about getting the basics right. And, I always felt the thing that was most remarkable about Pakistan above all else was the people, was what we call the human capital. So investing in education, in those kind of raw assets. That's why I think the current debate about the economy is so important, because you can get the economic growth returning. And let's be clear, Pakistan has grown. I think has had positive economic growth for I think there's 2 years maybe in the country's history where it hasn't, to check that fact, had positive economic growth. Really backing that, I think, is the right thing to do. But I was always unapologetic. I'm an optimist about Pakistan's future. And my time in the country only reaffirmed that.
Dr. Moeed, if I can have your thoughts on the same question as well.
So I think I just put it very simply. If the government, the public sector, it's got to make a cultural shift. It's going to move from controlling and regulating to facilitating. Just that cultural shift alone will open up so much space for the human capital that Christian's talking about, for the private sector, for the engines of economic growth. I think in my time in government, if I were to put my finger on one thing, it is that our structures are designed to prevent fast movement of anything. It's status quo oriented. And so if you're looking for change, it's a very difficult ask. If we can make that psychological shift, if you will, allowing those who know what to do in the private sector, in the economic space, to do what they need to, and facilitating them rather than putting rule after rule and regulation after regulation on them, I think you would find a fundamental shift. Once you do that, it's like osmosis. Water finds its own way. And then this private sector will actually start driving others to get to where we want to get to. I mean, I could give you a long spiel, but I think that's really the bottom line. At the end of the day, if I go back to Christian's time, for instance, I remember some of the most fascinating conversations between High Commissioners like him and myself were not about a particular issue on a particular day. I think we spent days on end debating, why was Pakistan doing well in COVID? How did we manage that? Those lessons have to be learned. And every time you will find the state was coordinated and it was allowing the private sector to take the lead in, for instance, development of whatever technology you needed, data collection. We got private sector people to come in and design data sources for us so that we could know exactly what was happening, etc. So it has to be a public-private partnership, but the public sector's role has to be step back, facilitate, let things move.
So you've, Dr. Mohit, you've actually cited the example of COVID-19 pandemic. So then let me ask you, what do you think was the case where certain policies across different governments, you saw successes in terms of certain policies being implemented in an effective manner, in other cases where we did not. So what were those certain elements that made that success possible? I'll ask you that question, and I'd also like to ask High Commissioner Turner, to share his thoughts as well, like as an observer from a diplomatic position. How did he, perceive that development?
I can tell you, Christian was the most confused person because he kept asking me, what's your theory? Why is Pakistan doing so well? Because everything around us, unfortunately, was falling apart in the region. But as far as I'm concerned, frankly, I don't think COVID is a good example to cite. It's not replicable in a way because the entire attention of the government and the coordinated mechanism around that was built to manage COVID. But in normal time, you won't have only one issue that the government has to coordinate. The system will have to coordinate 50 different issues. At that time, it was an artificial space because the entire world had come to a standstill and you had the luxury of focusing on that one existential threat. But it did tell you that coordination of government and bringing in people who knew what they had to do from the private sector was what really delivered. We had real data. We were not fudging numbers. We were meeting day in, day out, every day, 9 a.m. I remember the NCOC used to start. All day, people were working on this issue. And wherever we needed the private sector, they were available, ready to go. We didn't have to go through long procedures. Everybody was in a facilitative mode because it's a real existential threat. Now, that kind of urgency and focus on only one thing at a time, it's not going to happen in normal time. So it's not the best example to replicate, but the idea and how we managed it, I think the spirit of it can go a long way in explaining what we need to do.
The COVID was, I think, a real success story, and is an example of what Dr. Mohit has just talked about, and the importance of strong governing systems to coordinate across multiple agencies. Most of the complex challenges any government faces cannot be addressed just through one ministry, one line, and the ability to bring those together to have a whole of system response. We struggle with this in the UK. If we're looking at just about any area in my field, international affairs in the UK, I need to work with the Ministry of Defence. I need to work with my Home Office counterparts. So you have to bring all of those together. And I think that worked very effectively during the coronavirus pandemic. A clear authoritative lead through the health ministry and the health minister, and a real sense of putting data behind that. And in a way, it was the data that I thought was quite remarkable, a system that was actually built to tackle polio with support from partners, including the UK. That then translated across to the COVID response. There also, I'll be honest, I think there are some factors of how the pandemic impacted Pakistan, which PhDs will be written on in 20 years' time by health experts. I don't think any of us entirely understand yet exactly what happened epidemiologically. I think there's something to do with the socioeconomic structures, which in some cases meant that, for example, Pakistan was less impacted than, say India. But in all, it was a real success story.
So, High Commissioner Turner, let me ask you a very interesting question that might interest a lot of the people out here in Pakistan as well, and those that have actually followed your work of diplomacy. Let me ask you, you were among the very few pioneers of revolutionizing public diplomacy, and you did it by use of blending the ingredients of the culture as well as the innovative means of communication through social media. And people out here in Pakistan do really remember how you actually used to communicate to them, in the local language, in Urdu in particular. So tell us, how did you go about, using modern means of communication? Was there any resistance to the way you approached public diplomacy? How did you convince people, at your own agency to go about and conduct diplomacy in a different manner?
So it's a huge topic, and one I've, as you can imagine, thought a lot about as a practitioner. And I've been using social media as a diplomat for probably 12 years or so, and was one of the pioneers of using it in the British Foreign Office. And that's because I believe it goes back really to your first question. I believe that diplomacy at heart is about engagement. So I said it's about trust and relationships, and you build those relationships by engaging. And part of my job is to make sure I am informing the country in question. So there's British policies people need to understand, but also being able to communicate my views and my approach as ambassador in this case. And we suddenly got this tool, social media, to enable us to do that in the most extraordinary way. What I was saying and doing on social media, I don't think was that different to what I'd be saying in a broadcast interview, a podcast, a conversation with a print journalist, but it gave me much more ability to speak direct to the people of the country. Obviously, for that, I needed to work on my Urdu, lekin maine Urdu bahut kharab hai. So I always apologize for my Urdish and my poor attempts, and I it's a beautiful language I enjoyed learning a bit of. But the key in all of that, I think, was for my communication to be authentic. So those videos, those communications, they were all done by me. I mean, I had a team supporting me, but it had to be my voice, because if you see a guy in a suit who's just spouting the usual press releases, you quickly realize I think people turn off. So I tried to be authentic about it. My final point is that although I tried to really emphasize the public diplomacy, there were, of course, and Moeed's already inferred this, there were areas of my diplomacy that was very private. So some diplomacy rightly should stay on confidential channels and have the ability for two governments to speak to each other without fear that that's then repaid publicly. I don't think those two things needed to be contradictory. That ability to have trusting, private conversations, that was where I still did most of my work, but still be able to communicate more publicly and directly to engage with the Pakistani people.
Indeed, High Commissioner Turner, but let me also ask you, in terms of your own personal history, where do your roots go back to, when it comes to Pakistan? How were you so much able to be, comfortable in terms of, speaking in Urdu about the language and the culture itself?
No, I'm sorry to say that, I'd not lived or worked in Pakistan before my tour of duty. And sometimes diplomats will come back 2 or 3 times to a posting. And obviously I'd taken the time when I'd visited and worked in Pakistan a bit, and I'd taken time to spend some time with the diaspora community here. So I had some fun evenings in Manchester and Bradford and Leeds before I came to the country. But really, it was about what I often say to people is the most important diplomatic skill, which is listening. And that ability to listen and to understand, not think you have all the answers, and make sure I still spent time with my Urdu teacher.
Very interesting. Dr. Mohit Yousaf, let me sort of, pick your brains on this. Now that you are, in a very different position, more or less, in a educationist, but also in a very leadership position as well as the Vice Chancellor of Beacon House National University. Let me ask you then, what do you see in terms of a prospect of, building partnerships and, having a better educational outreach with, the global community and especially an important country as the United Kingdom?
Yeah, I'm sort of in some ways back to the anchor and happy to be doing what I am, because I truly believe it's, a country with 65% under the age of 30 out of 240 million. It's this cohort that matters. And even if you can change 10 lives and direct them and channel them, that's basically what universities do in the right direction. I think that's great service. The UK has been big on education in Pakistan for a long time. And I think that's one area where we need to do more, and as much as we can to open up spaces for both sides. Frankly, I mean, Christian said something earlier, which I'd emphasize. We have, unfortunately, because of Afghanistan and the post 9/11 scenario, Pakistan's perception has taken a big hit in the West. And it's one thing for me to be saying this, but for a British High Commissioner to be going back to his own people and government and saying, look, this is not what you think it is. It's very different. And, you've got to get out of that media frenzy about Pakistan. Those kind of things, educationists can help. When you have student exchanges, when you have Pakistanis going to Britain, when you have faculty talking to each other doing research. We have a chair, a Pakistan chair in more than one UK university. Those are things that I think can open up that space, remove misperceptions, and further academic pursuits and intellectual pursuits. So I'm very much committed to that. In fact, the Chevening Fellowship that the UK offers, we've just had a meeting here at BNU with them. And we're very much hoping to excite our students and younger faculty to avail these opportunities. I would also like to see more British citizens and students and faculty coming to Pakistan. I think that's the reverse that has to happen, because if Pakistan's got to change minds in the West, they have to come and see what this country is. And I tell you, my Osama 2.5 years, I don't know whether Christian would agree, my 2.5 years in government, I kid you not, every single person who I was able to invite to come to Pakistan physically went back with a completely changed perception of the country for the better. So, I mean, I think the more we can do that, the better it is.
Hi, Commissioner, your thoughts on this?
No, I really agree. I think Mohit puts it very, very eloquently. Education, it's a terribly important part of those people-to-people links I was talking about. It's one of the cornerstones of any society. Perceptions changing, absolutely correct. Every one of my visitors, my family members who had the privilege to come to Pakistan used to say, Christian, it's amazing. Why didn't you tell us? And I said, well, I did tell you. And so I do think seeing is believing. I would add one more point to everything that Mohit has said, and that is the importance of girls' education. And this unapologetically was a priority for the British government, actually successive British governments. We have a campaign called 12 Years of Education to get more girls into school. And it's probably the only area where, without wishing to be critical, I would say Pakistan needs to redouble its efforts on the gender parity indexes, various ways of measuring it. No country can fulfill its potential without unleashing the capability of half of its population. And really putting girls in the forefront of that. Some of the amazing Pakistani women I met, of course, Jinnah's vision, very clear on it, I think a very important component.
Let me just add one thing in response. Pakistan's a very interesting case when it comes to gender. Christian's right about sort of the gender indices and all of that. But at the same time, you've got remarkable stories of very empowered Pakistani women, including one that led the country and many, many others around the world. Also, the fact that the state of Pakistan doesn't have a problem with this. In fact, there's a lot of effort to get that space to the point where Christian is saying. The baseline is low, unfortunately. Of course, it's going to be an evolution, it's generational. But one of the other things I found in some Western circles is that somehow, unfortunately, Pakistan is tagged with other countries who may, as a state, have a problem with women becoming the leaders and the citizens that they should be. So Pakistan's a very interesting case where there's no sort of block on it or no hesitance on the state, part of the state, or even sort of the society, mainstream society. It's going to take time, but it's not a country where you're going to shun women back to the Stone Ages.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, if I'm able to voice my own opinion, being a son of an educator and a lawyer, my mother, I mean, she contributed quite greatly to the field of education in terms of making sure that, we have educated children across gender differences. So yeah, I mean, I don't shy away in terms of, sharing my own experience. But coming on to this very important question of perceptions, High Commissioner Turner, you pulled off an extremely great surprise. And let me ask you, in late 2021, when New Zealand team actually decided at the very last moment to, pull the plug on its ongoing tour in Pakistan, and unfortunately we had the English side follow suit, you did a remarkable job in terms of, convincing the English side to reconsider their decision, come to Pakistan, and that ended up, bringing a lot of happiness to the faces of Pakistani people and also the English fans, as they ended up, winning the T20 series as well as the Test series as well. Let me then ask you, what is this problem with the perception of the country, which, ends up becoming a nuisance a lot of the times?
Well, let me say a bit about that cricket example, because it was it was one of the toughest things I did in my time, and probably one of the most rewarding. And you will see behind me, actually, I've got my Babar Azam shirt and my England shirt from the Test in Rawalpindi, which was probably one of the greatest Test matches of all time. And of course, the High Commissioner had to be there for all 5 days. It was a requirement of my job, and those always are behind my desk now. They're real tokens of pride. I mean, the cancellation by the Black Caps that summer, which was so controversial, was a New Zealand decision, and it was taken on the grounds of security. And one of the difficult things, obviously, it triggered a decision by the England and Wales Cricket Board to pull those T20s, which would have been the first games in the country for 17 years, and we'd worked very hard to get back to that point. It's a good example of the communications we were talking about earlier, because the story was that was the fault of British government security advice, and that was incorrect. And I had to take the decision, which was, my decision, no one else's, to go out publicly and correct that story. And that caused a lot of controversy. And in the end, broadly speaking, led to the resignation of the chairman of the England and Wales Cricket Board. So this was not a small thing for a High Commissioner to do. From that low point, there was a lot of anger on both sides, a lot of frustration. You may remember Ramiz Raja then at the PCB, understandably very cross about what had happened. And we had to rebuild those relationships. And that took a lot of time. And the thread in this conversation about what we do as diplomats, that was listening to each side, that was getting them back together and building a path back to the eventual very successful tour of both the Test matches and the T20s, with, of course, the small matter of a World Cup final in between. And a lot of that was actually taking head on this perception we're talking about, this perception of insecurity. Using my experts who knew a lot about security in Pakistan, working with England and Wales Cricket Board experts, connecting them with the Pakistani government machine as well as the PCB to ensure we could all have a very good handle on what needed to be in place. And of course, when it got to it, over 3 months of cricket, everything ran incredibly smoothly, no incidents to report, and a real high point for the relations between the two countries, giving pleasure to millions of people. And my final point is that beyond that, some people say, well, Christian, it's all very nice. You happen to like cricket, and it's just a bit of soft diplomacy. I think actually it was a very hard-nosed piece of diplomacy. By focusing on that very important part of the relationship, I'd always been clear I wanted to bring England cricket back to Pakistan. It enabled me to have conversations with people in many parts of government and move issues forward that otherwise I think we wouldn't have been able to do in quite different areas of our relationship.
Look, on this cricket, I will give Christian all the credit for having pulled off the tour that he did. We're of course good hosts, so England was going to win. That's okay. But I would fancy a Pakistan-England final in the World Cup. After we've thrashed India a couple of times, I wouldn't mind having that duel with England as well. But you know what I want to really say is that there's one time in our entire interaction as officials that I was really angry at Christian. And I won't say much. There's a very funny story about Pakistan's National Security Advisor speaking to the British High Commissioner from a third country in really odd, desperate, in an odd, desperate moment, saying, what the heck is going on? Because we were on an official tour and Christian was, of course, there. And, I'm getting these frantic calls. Where's the Prime Minister? What happened? Oh, New Zealand is pulling out. And it was a big deal for Pakistan. And of course, for whatever reason, we talked and the news he gave me, I just couldn't believe it. And I was like, how could you let this happen? Of course, I wasn't thinking through the fact that it was actually New Zealand and not England that was leaving. But the fact of the matter is, I tried to explain that, look, I mean, how can they leave without asking you? It was really, I can't tell you how angry I was, but in retrospect, it was pretty funny. We had no signals. I was trying to find a place to talk, and it didn't end up well that day, either for me or for Christian. But finally, he got the team back. So I think we should be grateful.
And the fact that, we had both sides, the New Zealand and as well as England, visit Pakistan. Yeah, High Commissioner Turner, I beckoned your call and, I remember your video where you asked, the auto rickshaw driver to, or you said actually, where he asked you, where do you want to go? And you said, Pindi Julsa. And so we also, yes.
Pindi Julsa.
Yeah. And so did we actually, went to the Pindi Stadium and watched, the likes of James Anderson, Joe Root, play in the English side. And you ended up, your side actually ended up, winning that cricket match over there. And also the fact that, we had the pleasure of interacting with the Barmy Army. Very lovely folks, I must admit. And, they brought quite a different energy to the crowd itself. So, yeah, I'm personally grateful as well for, bringing about a different experience as a fan as well. So now let me also ask you, since you have so much love and passion for the game, where do you think Pakistan and the English side can collaborate together? Not just, bring about entertainment to the fans of the two countries, but for the cricketing fans out there all over the world.
Well, it's a whole new area, and the way the sport is developing. I mean, it's interesting. We've just had the iconic Ashes series here in the UK between England and Australia, and there's been a lot of commentary about whether the 5-day version of the game can, survive and still be popular in the face of these enormous franchises, the IPL, the Pakistan League, and I think the answer is it can. But the more we have the national sides playing, the development sides playing, the women's teams playing, building that interaction, English players coming to the Pakistan League. I think last year we had 10 or 12, really big names. I think that develops learning and that addresses the understanding points that Moeed made earlier. Whether it's a Chevening Scholarship or it's Alex Hales to come and pay for the Lahore Qalandars or whomever he was playing for, those sorts of connections really transform understanding and relationships, as well as having a great benefit for the game.
High Commissioner Turner, now you're actually serving in a different position as the political director. Let me then ask you, how has your experience serving as the High Commissioner in Pakistan helped you have a different perception about the country itself? Are you informed differently? Had you not been, the High Commissioner of Britain in Pakistan? And has it helped you in any way in terms of, approaching your insights, your assessments, or your decisions about the country and the region?
Of course, the answer to that is yes. I mean, we're all shaped by our experiences, and when you have lived and worked and been with your family in a country for 4 years, it becomes very much part of you. This current role, I think a lot about geopolitics, issues which Mohit and I spent many hours discussing together. I think about the connections between countries, and traditionally, someone in this sort of job, Undersecretary of State in a foreign ministry, probably would have had a background in the UK, at least in transatlantic relations, in NATO, maybe served in Brussels, and I hope that I am able to bring a different perspective. A lot of my career has been served in South Asia, in the Middle East, in Africa, and I hope that I'm able to bring, therefore, a different understanding. And I think that is very important at the minute. We are looking, as we are still seeing this terrible war of aggression in Ukraine, the consequences of that for the world, the grain prices, the commodity prices, the energy shocks, trying to find a path to peace in that conflict. And in that, the voice of countries like Pakistan, I think, is very, very important. It's no good the European countries coming and wagging their fingers and hectoring. That's got to be a partnership. And I hope with humility, I bring a bit more understanding of that perspective from my time in Pakistan. And in the broader sense, as we are seeing a contestation, the story of the decade of probably the next 20 years is the growing rivalry between China and the US. And actually, I think for all countries, trying to avoid that being a binary choice. And Pakistan, a close and understandably close relationship with China. That is not something I wish to deny, but still show that those British ties we're talking about are a very important part of the country's past and its future.
Hi, Commissioner Turner. Before I ask you about, the great power contestation, I have another important question, and that is about another important and a very significant regional country, and this is about India. How does the United Kingdom actually approach its relationship with the United Kingdom? Where does India actually factor in the United Kingdom's strategic and foreign policy calculus?
So look, India is a very important country for us, and it's an important relationship. In economic size, India has just overtaken the UK as the 5th largest economy in the world. If you look at the forecast of population, forecast to soon become the largest country in the world. Some of the emerging issues that we're all grappling with, tech is a very good example, an important voice on technology. So no apologies that the UK will have deep interests and work very closely with India, and also has many of the people connections that we also have in Pakistan. So that's all part of a very important relationship. The point I would make, and I was quite vocal on this during my time as High Commissioner, is that the era where we tried to hyphenate the policy between Pakistan and India is not one that continues. And I therefore do not believe that if one sees an up arrow in British policy on India, that leads to a down arrow on Pakistan. There's no automaticity there. We can still have, I think, a strong and important relationship with India, but also do so given our strong interests with Pakistan. And indeed, I don't think it's in Pakistan's interest, Mohit will be eloquent on this, to constantly be defined in the context of India.
Dr. Mohit, then let me also ask you, should it in any way perturb or disturb Pakistan that United Kingdom happens to have, or, aspires closer relationship with India?
That's not for us to decide, Osama, in Pakistan. I think, there's no reason why Pakistan or any country should close its eyes to the fact that another country and many countries have tried to court India. Now, I have a view on that, and my view is that the Western world is courting India, thinking that India is going to do their bidding on China. That's not going to happen. It's as simple as that. When the Western world wakes up to that reality, it's for them to decide. I know the US thinking better than others, but the UK, Europe, there is now a sort of China frenzy, if you will, in some capitals. I'm not talking of London, but just generally. And the thought process I've seen mature over time is that China is the real long-term challenge, and India is the only country that's going to be the counterweight, if you will, it's not going to work. That's just simply not where things are. I think Ukraine was a bit of a rude awakening for the West, because the thought process in some capitals was, of course, India is going to come lock, stock, and barrel and join hands. So as a Pakistani, or as a former Pakistani official, I think it's fairly short-sighted. That said, it's not for me to decide. I have to find ways to cultivate my relationship with the UK and others as best I can, working on my strengths rather than pointing to others and what they're doing. And if I build on my strengths, then obviously I'm going to get more space, and I'm going to use that space to outmaneuver my adversary. That's just how international relations work. I mean, it's, India has done the same thing. I would argue very unfairly, but, they've benefited from Pakistan's perception deficit after 9/11. I've got to do what I've got to do, and that is to build on my economic relationship with the UK, use my people-to-people strength because of diaspora and the history behind it, and create a nature of a relationship where the UK simply cannot ignore what Pakistan is asking. And I think the UK will want to do the same thing. Once I do that, my hand is strengthened, and I can do other things better than I can when my hand is weaker. So, I don't have time to waste on who's good and who's bad and why. I want to fix my things to get to a point where the UK has to be knocking on my door rather than me knocking on their door. And I'm sure the UK wants to do the same thing. There's no reason to mince words over that.
High Commissioner Turner, let me, draw your attention to great power contestation that you were referring to between, the specter of that between the United States and China. Recently, we've seen Europe actually, come up with this policy preference that it would like to de-risk instead of, decouple with China. United Kingdom, on the other hand, has also decided to, remove companies like Huawei from its 5G networks by 2027. So where do you think the United Kingdom is likely to regulate or moderate its policy with respect to China?
It's a huge set of issues for us all, and for the experts watching the podcast who would like more detail. I would refer them to a speech that my boss, the Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, gave at Mansion House in April of this year, where he answered that question in depth over about an hour. The shorthand was we think three things we have to approach for our national interest, and as Moeed was just describing, in the end, all countries are acting in their own national interest. The first is we have to protect core aspects of our equities, and that includes areas where we feel China's activity threatens us. There are areas we disagree on respectfully. Some aspects of cyber espionage and intrusion, the decision which the then cabinet took on the involvement of Huawei in our 5G technology. And these are detailed decisions in specific contexts where we are saying we will protect. So the first approach is protect. The second is the need to align with other countries. The importance of China, its deep history, its role as a global power means that no single country, not the UK for sure, can act alone. So that the conversations that I have as a senior diplomat with partners all across the world, including Pakistan, thinking of I was in China in July having the conversations with South Africa, Turkey, Brazil, European partners, to make sure we're understanding the decisions each other is taking. We have to act together rather than alone. So that is align. And then the third approach is to engage. And there are some voices who might say that it is wrong to be engaging China. That is not the British government's view. As I said, I personally traveled to Beijing in July for a deep round of talks. They're a very good round of talks, but they were areas of deep disagreement in them, as you might expect. Engaging a country is not a gift we bestow. It's a core of the relations and the diplomacy. So we think it's important to carry on that conversation to narrow differences, to find areas of commonality. And of course, in some of the areas of global challenge we've touched on in this conversation, climate change, artificial intelligence, technology, it's going to be absolutely vital that we are working with China and understanding how we can address those challenges together. So protect, align, and engage is the approach that we are trying to take in that relationship with China and China's role on the world stage.
Hi, Commissioner Turner and Dr. Mohid. I have a question for both of you. Dr. Mohid, it was your brainchild when Pakistan actually, came up with this idea of no camp politics, and that certainly requires or emphasizes engaging with different global powers to bring about economic investments or in areas that we've discussed already in this conversation. Then let me ask both of you, what do you think would really be needed in order to bring about a greater footprint in the economic domain from the United Kingdom with respect to foreign direct investments in Pakistan? What are some of the things that British investors expect with respect to the ecosystem in Pakistan? And what are your thoughts as well, Dr. Mohid, in terms of how could Pakistan improve its game better?
I think, Osama, first on your great power contestation, Christian's response, I think there is a response by the third group. You've got these two elephants clearly now coming to a head. You can call it US-China, you could call it West-China, whatever you want to call it, and China's orbit. There is a view that comes from a third space, if you will, which is, guys, understand that whatever you do is not what you can get away with or could get away with during the Cold War. Cold War, you had a non-aligned movement. They said, leave us alone, you fight over whatever you want to fight over. There were two camps, ideological camps. You've now got a deeply integrated economy. There is nothing in the global economy that can be delinked from one aspect or the other. In this environment, any contestation is going to hurt overwhelming majority of the world, right? And at the end of the day, it's also going to hurt the giants. And we are seeing that painful transition or attempts at transition, starting with what I now call the technology iron. You're not going to have the technology wall. You're not going to have the iron wall, but you're going to have a technology wall very soon, whether we like it or not. And so my point is, let's pause for a second and see whether all aspects and elements of this contestation are really needed, or are we going overboard already? Because what's happening for countries like Pakistan is that we are being forced into this corner of making a choice, even though both camps are saying, we're not asking you to make a choice. Well, let me ask you a question. If I can't use a Huawei router in my office to get a Western funding for a project, what else is a choice? I'm not using that router because I love China or hate UK or whatever. I'm using it because it's cheaper. And wherever I get better technology that's cheaper, I'll use the other one. For Pakistan, we're in a very odd situation, very difficult situation. All our economic input comes from China. Virtually all of it goes to the West. Now, if you ask me to make a choice, I mean, that's just brutally unfair in a world where the standards were created by the giants to cooperate. I think that's an important thing that, frankly, the Western world and China and everybody else needs to understand, that there are countries who are saying, we can help lower the temperature. We don't want to be caught in this fight, and take Pakistan as one of those countries. That's the origin of the no-camp politics. And it's not doing a favor either to the West or China. We don't want to be without either one of them. They're both very important for us. What we are really saying is, for a country like Pakistan, choosing a camp doesn't make sense. So facilitate that. And in return, we'll help you lower the temperature in this region, rather than countries becoming proxy grounds for the battle that's unfortunately being fought in the technology world and may expand later.
And what are your thoughts, High Commissioner Turner, especially, with respect to the question on, improving or sort of like, doubling down on the footprint of the United Kingdom in the economic domain in Pakistan?
So look, I agree with the broad thrust of Mohid's argument. I mean, there's bits of it, a conversation we've had many times in different guises avoiding campism, not forcing countries to choose, trying to avoid actually a sort of great game mentality of you're with us, you're against us. De-escalation, I think, is an important, as you'd expect as a diplomat. A lot of my life is about de-escalation and trying to cool temperatures. To the economic growth part of that, and your question on how we help drive that, I think one could look at that from the perspective both of a partner country like the UK and from Pakistan's perspective. For the UK, I think, as I implied earlier, I think there is more we have to keep doing to get British businesses and British investment coming. Now, some of that is just a good trade policy. We have a new scheme called the Developing Countries Trading Scheme, which gives preferential access to two-way trade, bringing trade delegations in, making those connections. All of that an important area of work that I know that the High Commission is carrying on building. We also have some large pieces of public sector investment, British public sector investment in particularly green infrastructure. This is called British Investment Partnerships, and our loan guarantees called UK Export Finance to help make it favourable for companies to make those big investments. You add all of that up, it's actually quite a lot of capital that is coming in to try and make the conditions right for those trade figures to grow. And it's one of my regrets of my time in Pakistan that I didn't grow the trade figures as much as I had hoped. So I think that's an onus on us as a partner country to help put those conditions in place. Equally, when you talk to most businesses, they just want one thing, and that's certainty so that they can be sure of a return on their investment. Therefore, many companies at the minute will look at the situation in Pakistan and say that they want to have a degree of political certainty, the path through the coming elections, and economic stability that will allow them to be confident to make those investments. And so certainly my country has been a voice in saying, difficult though it is, the agreement with the IMF is a very important part of reassuring markets and putting the conditions in place for that economic growth we talked about earlier, and ensuring that we can really put in place the building blocks for the private sector investment to flow.
So before we go ahead and wrap up this conversation, High Commissioner Turner, let me ask you last two questions. My second last question is basically about your love with making, hiking trips to Margalla Hills. And I remember in one of those moments, you actually made this video, a public service message that you did by picking up trash on the Margalla trails, on one of the Margalla trails, in fact. What really inspired you or motivated you to come up with that message in the first place about such an important issue of, protecting our environment?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, I think the climate change question, history has proven with the floods last year, it became a very important issue between us. The question of the environment is I think, the right one to back. And I was privileged to see a lot of Pakistan's beautiful landscapes, and it did upset me when I saw that not being looked after and protecting the beautiful heritage. I'll be honest, that trash video was it was a photo, it was very spontaneous. And I mentioned about social media as a diplomat, sometimes it needs to be authentic. And I had a habit of walking up the hill early in the morning for a bit of exercise, and to clear my head, and I got to a beautiful picnic spot up near Manal, and it was covered in trash. And I tended to hike with a plastic bag, and I'd filled it, and I'd not made much song and dance about that, but I was a bit cross. And so I filled this plastic bag and took a photo, and was reminded by one of the colleagues I was walking with of that very nice phrase, that Nisaf, cleanliness is half of your faith. And I think actually it was quite an edgy message, because it could have looked like I was wagging my finger at Pakistanis. But by putting, I think, in that context, I was able to say, look, we've all got a responsibility to keep this beautiful land clean. And then I went to work, and at about 11 o'clock, one of my media team called me and said, "Hi, Commissioner, what have you done this morning? And have you seen it's going absolutely bananas on social media?" And I was worried I was going to get in some hot soup. But I hope it made people think about that cleanliness point and keeping some of these amazing landscapes that I was privileged to visit in my time clean.
Yeah, before we part, I must also ask you that, before you get your another call for, Julsa to Pakistan. How much do you really miss Pakistan, in your new role?
Well, look, I hope this is clear to everyone. My deep affection for the country, my time there. There's an awful lot I miss. I've talked about the landscape, the geography, some of the history, the culture, the places I was able to visit. I was always actually happier. This is no critique of the red zone, but I was always happier when traveling around the country, meeting people. I certainly miss the friends and some of the people I made, and I will conclude, because it would be wrong of me not to, with the khana. Kyunki khana bahut mazedar hai, and I will try and make sure I have some dal for lunch today, just to show you I'm still keeping my hand in.
Dr. Mohit, your parting thoughts?
No, look, I mean, it was a good journey. I enjoyed working with Christian. I think most of us did. The best thing I'll say again, look, I don't think I conceded an inch, and I don't think he conceded an inch where we didn't have to. Yet, we knew the limitations, and we found ways to make things work. And that's really what diplomacy is about. So I really did enjoy it. We would welcome him back in Pakistan whenever he wants. And I do think our relationship has done wonders, but has a long way to go. And that's really the focus that I'm sure Christian's successor and, my successors will actually continue pursuing.
High Commissioner Christian Turner, Dr. Mohit, thank you for joining us for this conversation.
Bahut shukriya. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Good to see you, Christian. Take care.
Khuda Hafiz. Thank you so much for staying with us through this conversation with High Commissioner Christian Turner and Dr. Mohit Yusuf. Our team works very hard to make this work possible, and it would mean the world to us if you could like and share our content to show your support. And if you'd like to stay informed on upcoming podcasts and other work, please hit the bell icon.